Jackson had always thought his life on the colony would be quiet. The settlement was small, the buildings tall and metallic, with blinking lights along the walkways, and the air hummed with machines. He liked it that way, quiet, predictable, safe. He didn't have many friends. Most people were busy with their own work, and he didn't mind. A human could survive alone if they had routines, and Jackson's routines were simple but comforting. That morning, he woke to the usual drone sounds outside his apartment, but when he checked the small landing pad, there was something different waiting for him. A crate, small but heavy, hummed softly. A label glowed faintly in red letters. Exotic pet human ownership. Jackson raised an eyebrow. He hadn't ordered any pets. In fact, he had never thought about owning one. He liked plants. He liked books. He liked silence. Still, curiosity tugged at him. Maybe it was a gift from someone in the colony. Maybe the system had made a mistake. Either way, he rolled the crate to his living room, wiped off the dust from the shipping panel, and opened it carefully. He expected something small and cute. Maybe a floating orb creature, like the ones he had seen on holovideos. Maybe a tiny dragon with scales that shimmered under the light. Maybe even a furball that purred when you touched it. Anything like that. What he found instead made his heart stop. Inside the crate was a girl. Or at least, something that looked almost like a girl. She was very pale, almost like moonlight had been painted on her skin. Her long hair was black as night and tangled, falling in front of her face. Her eyes were enormous, glowing faintly red, and they darted around in panic. When she hissed softly, Jackson froze. There were sharp teeth just visible behind her lips. She curled into herself, trembling violently, like the slightest movement would break her. Jackson instinctively held up his hands. He wasn't threatening her. He wasn't sure she would understand that, but he had to try. "Hey, I won't hurt you," he said softly, his voice shaking slightly. The creature's red eyes met his, wide with fear, and she whispered something that sounded like, "Why? Why am I here?" Jackson's chest tightened. This was not a pet. This was not an animal. This was someone or something frightened and alone. He didn't know how to respond. For a long minute, neither of them moved. Jackson just stood there, feeling the weight of her fear pressing against him. He looked at her hands, delicate but tense, her long fingers curling like she was holding herself together. He realized that whatever had brought her here, she had been through something terrible. She had been taken from somewhere, put in a crate, and sent to a human she didn't know. Jackson felt a strange mix of fear and pity. He had imagined a companion, a pet that would be fun or cute or even loyal. But staring at her now, he knew he couldn't think that way. She was alive. She was sentient. And she needed him to be different than he had ever imagined. "Can you stand?" he asked gently. Stepping back to give her space, she hesitated. Her red eyes flickered with mistrust and terror. Slowly, painfully, she rose, wobbling on legs that were too long and too thin. Her movements were careful, almost like she expected the floor to swallow her at any moment. Jackson knelt down, showing her that he meant no harm. "I won't hurt you," he repeated. "You're safe here. At least as safe as I can make it." For a moment, she just stared. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. It was a tiny movement, but it was enough for Jackson to feel hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust him. He smiled, a little awkwardly, and said, "I guess." I should get you out of that crate properly. Let's start there." As he guided her to the small corner of his living room, he noticed a faint quiver in her shoulders, the way she flinched at the smallest sound. He realized then that he hadn't been given a pet. He had been given someone broken, someone terrified, someone who might never trust again, and somehow, even though it scared him, Jackson felt a strange kind of hope, because maybe, just maybe, he could help her. The first few hours with her were difficult. Jackson tried to offer comfort, but every time he moved, she flinched, retreating into the corner he had cleared for her. She had no name, no history he could understand, only frightened eyes that watched him with suspicion. Her hands shook, and her teeth peeked out when she hissed, sharp and threatening, as if she expected him to attack at any moment. Jackson realized quickly that this wasn't just fear. This was trauma. Whoever had sent her here hadn't treated her like a living being. They hadn't considered what she might feel, what she might need. They had promised him a pet, but instead they delivered someone broken, scared, and very much alive. He sighed, sitting down a careful distance away. "I don't know what to call you," he said softly. "Do you have a name?" The creature Lyra, he would later name. Her tilted her head slowly, watching him. Her red eyes glowed faintly in the soft colony lights, and for the first time she spoke in a whisper, so soft it was almost like a breeze. "Ra," she said. Jackson nodded. "Lyra, okay, I like that." He paused, trying to think of what to do next. He didn't want to scare her more, but he couldn't leave her huddled and alone forever. "Lyra, can you eat? Are you hungry?" She hesitated, glancing at the small tray of alien rations he had put out earlier. Finally, with a trembling hand, she reached forward. Jackson watched every movement carefully, noticing how her fingers twitched and how her body tensed with every small motion. When she finally took a piece of food, she recoiled as if she expected it to bite back. Jackson forced a small smile. "It's okay. You're safe. I promise." For hours, he stayed close but silent, letting her explore her new space. Every shadow seemed to frighten her. Every noise made her jump. And every time she hissed or bared her teeth, Jackson felt a pang of guilt. He had not asked for this, yet he could not ignore it. He could not ignore her. Night came quickly in the artificial colony. The lights dimmed, and Jackson decided to try something new. He sat on the floor, legs crossed, and waited. After a long while, Lyra crept forward. She didn't speak. She didn't even look directly at him. She simply sat across the room, her knees drawn to her chest, watching him eat quietly. Jackson smiled gently. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. "I'm not going anywhere. Not tonight. Not ever." For a long time, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, she lifted a trembling hand and mimicked his movements with the food. It was awkward, hesitant, and fragile, but it was a start. Jackson handed her another piece. Her hand shook, and her fingers barely touched the food. But she accepted it. A small laugh escaped Jackson's lips, soft and uncertain. "See, you're learning." Lyra flinched at the sound but didn't pull away. Her eyes studied him carefully, as if she were trying to understand whether he would hurt her or not. And Jackson, for the first time, realized that this was more than fear. It was trust in its smallest form, fragile and delicate, but real. Over the next few days, Jackson and Lyra settled into a tentative routine. He gave her food, soft blankets, and space. He spoke to her gently, even when she didn't respond. And slowly, very slowly, she began to relax. She no longer flinched at every movement, though she still kept her distance. She would watch him while he worked on his small repairs around the apartment or read his old books. Sometimes she would follow him silently, her shadow gliding across the walls like a quiet echo. One evening, Jackson asked softly, "Do you ever talk to anyone? Did you have friends?" Lyra's shoulders tensed. Her red eyes flickered with pain. No, only shadows, only cages. Jackson felt his chest tighten. "Not here," he said firmly. "Not anymore. You're safe. I'll make sure of it." For the first time, she didn't shrink away. She just looked at him, her eyes wide and uncertain, but not hostile. Jackson smiled again, feeling a spark of hope he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know how long it would take for her to trust him fully. But for now, the smallest connection had been made. And that connection, fragile and trembling as it was, gave him a feeling he hadn't expected. Maybe this was what he had needed all along, not a pet, not something simple, but someone who needed him. Someone who could teach him patience, care, and the fragile strength of trust. Days turned into nights, and nights into quiet mornings. Jackson noticed subtle changes in Lyra. At first, she had stayed in the corner of the room, trembling at every sound. Now, she had started moving more freely, exploring the apartment cautiously. Her steps were light and careful, almost like she was afraid the floor might bite her. But she no longer cowered when he entered the room. Jackson began leaving small gifts for her, pieces of food she liked, soft blankets, and even small trinkets he had found in the colony's market. Sometimes he would sit quietly near her, reading one of his old books or tinkering with a gadget, just so she could watch him without fear. Slowly, she began to watch him, not with terror, but with curiosity. One evening, Jackson prepared a simple meal. He placed a plate on the floor and sat a short distance away. Lyra's red eyes followed him carefully. She didn't move immediately, but after a long pause, she stepped forward, her hands trembling as she took the food. Jackson smiled softly. "You don't have to hurry," he said gently. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." For the first time, she sat close enough that he could see the faint scars along her arms. Jackson's heart tightened. He didn't know her story, didn't know what she had endured, but he knew it had been terrible. And yet, here she was, live, trembling, but slowly opening up to him. Over the next few days, he tried speaking to her more. At first, it was simple words, gestures, and gentle encouragement. He would say, "Good morning," even if she didn't respond. He would leave little notes near her resting spot with words like, "You're safe," or "It's okay." He didn't know if she could read them yet, but he hoped she would someday. Lyra began responding in her own way. She would mimic his movements, sit closer to him while he worked, and sometimes, just sometimes, she would allow him to touch her hand. Her skin was cold and soft, and she flinched slightly at the contact. But she didn't pull away completely. One night, a storm rumbled outside the colony. The lights flickered, and the hum of machinery sounded different, almost threatening. Lyra froze in the middle of the room, her red eyes wide. Jackson noticed immediately. He knelt down, arms open, speaking softly. "It's okay, Lyra. It's just a storm. Nothing is going to hurt you." She shook slightly but didn't run. Slowly, hesitantly, she crawled into his lap. Jackson held her gently, letting her rest her head on his chest. He could feel her trembling, but he didn't move. He just let her be, For a long time, they sat together in silence, listening to the storm. Jackson realized something important. Trust wasn't something given. It was something earned, slowly, carefully, with patience. Lyra wasn't a pet. She wasn't something to control or train. She was someone fragile, someone who had been hurt, and now she needed him to be gentle, constant, and reliable. Days passed, and the bond between them grew. Lyra started exploring more boldly. She would follow Jackson around the apartment, watching him, asking questions in soft whispers, and even attempting to speak words more clearly. Jackson found himself laughing quietly at the strange sounds she made when trying new words. One evening, Jackson asked, "Do you remember where you came from?" Lyra's eyes darkened and she looked away. Shadows, cages, nothing else, she whispered. Jackson's heart ached. He wanted to take away her pain, but he knew he couldn't erase the past. All he could do was offer her a present, a safe place where she could heal. "You're safe here," he said softly, brushing her hair from her face. "I'll take care of you, Lyra. You don't have to be afraid anymore." For a moment, her red eyes glimmered with something new, maybe hope, maybe trust. She leaned slightly into his touch, a quiet gesture that said more than words could. Jackson smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. He had come into this expecting a pet. Instead, he had found someone broken, scared, and alone. And slowly, through patience, kindness, and gentle care, she was starting to trust him. For the first time in a long while, Jackson didn't feel lonely. And for the first time, Lyra didn't feel completely afraid. And in that quiet apartment, amidst the hum of machines and the soft glow of the colony lights, a fragile friendship began to grow one that neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. The colony was supposed to be safe. Its walls were thick, energy shields humming quietly, and security drones patrolling the perimeter. But Jackson had learned one thing: no place was ever completely safe. He had spent months alone, and now, with Lyra slowly trusting him, he feared for her more than ever. It was late, and the artificial night bathed the colony in a soft blue glow. Jackson had gone to bed early, tired from a long day of maintenance work. Lyra had curled up near his small table, watching quietly as he scribbled notes for tomorrow's tasks. He smiled at her, a little tired but warm. "Good night, Lyra. Sleep well." She didn't answer, just blinked slowly, her red eyes reflecting the dim light. Jackson didn't mind. He knew she was learning, and every quiet moment together was progress. Then, without warning, the alarms blared. Red lights flashed, shaking the quiet of the apartment. Jackson bolted upright. His heart pounded as he realized what was happening in Alien raiders had found a way into the colony. "Lyra," he shouted, "stay back." But she didn't run. Her eyes glowed brighter, and for the first time, Jackson saw something in her gaze he hadn't noticed before. Fear was still there, yes, but beneath it, there was determination. She didn't want to flee. She wanted to protect. The first intruder crashed through the outer door, a hulking figure with jagged armor and claws that gleamed under the flashing lights. Jackson froze, unsure what to do. He had no weapons, no plan, only panic and the desire to keep Lyra safe. But Lyra moved first. With a fluid, almost inhuman grace, she leaped in front of Jackson, baring her sharp teeth. The intruder snarled, swinging a claw at her, but she darted aside like a shadow, faster than Jackson could follow. She struck again, a blur of motion, and the intruder staggered back, hissing in surprise. Jackson's mouth went dry. He had always feared her abilities, her sharp teeth, her speed. But now, seeing her fight to protect him, he felt something strange pride mixed with awe. This frightened, trembling creature he had been caring for was powerful beyond measure, and she was using that power for him. Another intruder entered, and Jackson stumbled backward, trying to keep out of the way. Lyra hissed and launched herself at the second intruder, knocking him down with terrifying strength. Jackson realized then that she wasn't just scared anymore. She was fighting for something she cared about. For him, after a tense few minutes, the intruders retreated, growling and injured, disappearing into the night. Jackson sank to the floor, breathing heavily. Lyra dropped beside him, her chest heaving, red eyes still glowing faintly. He reached for her, hands shaking, and pulled her close. You saved me," he whispered. "You didn't have to, but you did. You're amazing." Lyra trembled in his arms, not from fear this time, but exhaustion. Her sharp teeth were still visible, her body tense, but slowly she relaxed slightly against him. For the first time, Jackson realized how much she had changed. She was no longer just a frightened alien. She was a protector, someone strong, someone who trusted him enough to fight for him. He brushed her hair back gently, speaking softly. "It's over. You're safe now. I've got you, always." She looked up at him, and her glowing eyes softened. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to be vulnerable again, leaning into him as if she knew, finally, that he meant what he said. Jackson's chest tightened with emotion. He had come into this expecting a pet, a simple companion. Instead, he had found someone complex, someone broken and scared, but also fierce, loyal, and capable of love in her own way. That night, as the colony's lights returned to normal and the hum of machinery filled the quiet apartment, Jackson realized something important. Trust was fragile, but it was powerful, and what they had him and Lyra was more than just survival. It was connection. It was hope. He held her close, whispering quietly, "I promised you safety, and I'll keep that promise, no matter what." For the first time, Lyra didn't shrink away. She rested her head against him, exhausted but alive. And Jackson knew, in that moment, that whatever dangers came next, they would face them together. The night after the attack, Jackson barely slept. He stayed awake, listening to the quiet hum of the colony's systems and watching Lyra curl up in her small corner. She didn't move much, still shaken from the fight, but he could see her red eyes scanning the room even in the dim light. He realized something then. She had been alone for so long that even moments of silence felt like danger to her. Jackson slid quietly to the floor, sitting near her without making a sound. "Hey," he whispered, careful not to startle her. "It's okay. Nothing's going to hurt you tonight." Lyra didn't respond. She just blinked slowly, her body tense. Slowly, hesitantly, she inched closer. Her hand brushed his, and she flinched, but she didn't pull away completely. Jackson smiled softly. It was a small gesture, but it meant trust. A fragile, trembling trust, but real. Days passed, and the two settled into a quiet routine. Jackson would work during the day, repairing machinery or organizing supplies. Lyra would follow him round silently, watching him with curiosity. Sometimes she would mimic his movements, tilting her head like she was trying to understand. Other times she would sit in a corner, quietly drawing strange symbols in the dust with her fingers. Jackson learned to appreciate these small moments. He would talk to her about his work, explaining what he was doing as if she could understand everything. She often listened in silence, her eyes wide, occasionally nodding or whispering a question. Her voice was soft, almost musical, but there was a hesitancy to it, as if she were afraid of being heard. One evening, after a long day, Jackson prepared a simple meal. He sat on the floor, placing 2 plates carefully in front of them. Lyra approached slowly, her eyes darting around as if the shadows themselves might jump at her. When she sat across from him, Jackson smiled. "You don't have to eat fast," he said softly. "Take your time." For a moment, she just stared at the food, then at him. Her hand trembled as she reached for a piece. Jackson watched carefully, offering her gentle words of encouragement. "It's okay. You're safe." She took the food slowly, eating with delicate movements. Jackson noticed her breathing had slowed slightly, the tension in her shoulders easing. It was a small victory, but he felt a surge of hope. She was learning to live again. As the days passed, Jackson began sharing small stories from his life, funny memories from Earth, tales of his childhood, and even silly jokes. At first, Lyra didn't react, but gradually she began to respond, sometimes with a quiet laugh or a soft smile. Jackson's heart warmed. For the first time, he realized that she wasn't just surviving. She was beginning to feel again. One evening, he asked gently, "Do you ever remember your life before this?" Lyra's red eyes darkened. She looked away, whispering, "Shadows, cages, nothing else." Her voice trembled, but there was no anger, only pain. Jackson's chest tightened. He wanted to take away that pain, but he knew he couldn't erase the past. All he could do was offer her a present, a safe place where she could begin again. "You're safe here," he said softly, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "I'll take care of you, Lyra. You don't have to be afraid anymore." For a long moment, she simply stared at him. Then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned closer, resting her head on his shoulder. Jackson felt a warmth spread through his chest. She was letting him in. She was beginning to trust him fully. Over the next few days, they spent more time together. Lyra would follow him while he worked, sometimes mimicking his actions or attempting to help in small ways. They shared quiet meals, whispered conversations, and moments of gentle laughter. Jackson realized that he had come into this expecting a pet. Instead, he had found someone who needed him just as much as he needed her. One evening, Jackson watched Lyra as she gazed out the small colony window, the stars beyond twinkling faintly. "You know," he said softly, "I never thought I'd find someone like you here. Someone who understands loneliness." Lyra turned her head, meeting his eyes. There was a flicker of something bright there, hope, maybe, or gratitude. She whispered, I understand now. Not alone. Not anymore." Jackson smiled, feeling a deep connection. The colony was still cold and metallic, and the outside universe was still dangerous. But in that quiet room, with Lyra by his side, he realized something important. They were no longer alone. They had each other, and for the first time in years, Jackson felt that maybe, just maybe, life could be different. The colony had been quiet for a few weeks, too quiet. Jackson knew better than to trust the silence completely. Ever since the first attack, he had kept an eye on the perimeter, checking the walls and the security drones daily. But he had grown careless, lulled by the calm and by the fragile sense of normalcy he and Lyra had begun to enjoy. It was late, and Jackson was working on a small repair near the entrance. Lyra was nearby, sitting on a table, tracing patterns in the dust with her fingers. The soft red glow of her eyes illuminated the designs, like tiny constellations she had drawn herself. Jackson watched her, feeling a warmth in his chest. She had come so far. From terrified and trembling, she was now cautious, curious, almost confident. Then the alarms shattered the silence. Red lights flashed across the room. The hum of the colony's machinery deepened into a warning tone. Jackson's heart raced. He knew what it meant. Another breach, Lyra, he shouted. Stay back. But she didn't move. Instead, her eyes glowed brighter, sharper, and Jackson realized she wasn't afraid this time. She was ready. A massive shadow moved outside the reinforced window. Jackson barely had time to react before a hulking alien figure smashed through the barrier, sending shards of glass and debris flying. Jackson stumbled back. His hands pressed against his chest as fear threatened to freeze him in place. Lyra stepped forward, her movements fluid, almost predatory. She hissed, her voice low and fierce. The intruder lunged at her, claws extended, and she dodged with incredible speed. Her teeth flashed as she struck back, landing precise. Powerful blows that sent the creature staggering. Jackson watched, his chest pounding, as the woman he had nursed from fear to trust became a force of protection. She was no longer fragile. She was fierce, brave, and unstoppable when defending him. Every move she made was calculated, every strike purposeful. And she wasn't just fighting for survival, she was fighting for him. Another intruder entered, larger and more menacing than the first. Jackson felt panic rise, but Lyra's gaze met his. There was no hesitation in her eyes, only determination. He realized something that terrified and awed him at the same time. She trusted him completely. She believed he was worth protecting. Go, he shouted, pointing toward the exit. Get out of here. Lyra didn't move. Instead, she leaped toward the intruder, her speed and strength unmatched. Jackson barely kept up, using debris and his tools to defend himself. Together, they forced the creatures back, cornering them until they retreated into the night. When the last intruder fled, Lyra collapsed, her chest heaving, her red eyes dimming to a softer glow. Jackson rushed to her side, kneeling down. Lyra, you're okay, he said, his voice trembling. You're safe now. I've got you. She leaned weakly into him, trembling not from fear this time, but from exhaustion. Jackson brushed her hair back gently. I know you're tired. You were amazing. You saved me. You didn't have to, but you did. I'm grateful, more than I can say. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. I trust you, she said. The words were small, but they carried everything: fear, hope, gratitude, and a fragile kind of love. Jackson held her close, feeling her warmth against him. He realized that what had begun as a strange, terrifying situation a human promised a pet, but given a frightened alien, vampire woman, had grown into something profound. This bond was real, stronger than fear, stronger than danger. It was built on trust, care, and the shared understanding of loneliness. The storm of emotions in Jackson's chest was overwhelming. He had thought he needed a companion. Instead, he had found someone who needed him, just as he needed her. He whispered, almost to himself, "I promised you safety, and I'll keep that promise, always." Lyra rested her head on his shoulder, her body finally relaxing. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to be fully vulnerable. Jackson held her close, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and a deep, tender connection that went beyond words. Outside, the colony remained quiet, the danger gone for now. But inside, Jackson and Lyra had faced something far greater than any intruder. They had faced fear, trust, and the truth of their bond. And they had survived. Together, in that moment, Jackson realized that no matter what the universe threw at them next, they were stronger because they had each other. And for the first time, he felt truly ready for anything, as long as Lyra was by his side.